Happy Monday, everybody. Let's raid my lab. All right, everybody, we're talking buttons today. And I'm going to start off getting a little philosophical with you. We live in an age where everything is touchscreen, and if you want to unlock something, you have to open up your phone and scan your fingerprint and find the app and load the app and stuff like that. That I think there's a sense that people crave physical buttons. And I grew up a child of the 80s, so that sound was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Pac-Man arcade games and all those kinds of things, and that's cool. Like, there's something to just physically having a button that is just sitting there waiting to be pressed. And so we're going to start out and we're going to look at some of the cheap simple buttons, and I've got a bin here, and these particular red ones right here are really cheap, like probably 5 cents, 10 cents a piece, and I order them by the hundred. And if you saw the last video about enclosures, you saw one where I used 30 of these buttons to make a game. But these are super cheap, super good to have on hand. They're real easy, just a little plastic nut on them. They're what they call momentary contact buttons, which means these two wires are separate. These two pins are separate until the button is pushed, and then all of a sudden they're connected. And so they're super cheap, great to have on hand. Not as easy to buy the other colors, but I'll buy them 10 or 20 at a time in white, green, blue. There's a blue. There's just different colors available that I like to have these things on hand. A few other little things I have in here. Just this button has a little battery in it. Another momentary contact button. This is an old school one I had as a kid. I think it was part of my train set for Radio Shack. Obvious that something like this that was built in the 80s, just the plastic is heavier duty. They use real metal nuts instead of the plastic ones that are on these buttons. Here's a black one, by the way. There's just such a difference in the metal on the little terminals and stuff like that. Just quality button. If you're taking apart some old electronic stuff, highly recommend you save stuff like this. Keep it out of the landfill and use it for your projects. The next thing is these buttons are kind of a maker favorite. I don't use them very much, but now that I have a 3D printer and a laser, they're becoming a little bit more handy. They're little dual pole surface mount, breadboard mount, very clicky, very tactile, very cheap buttons. And one of the things that's kind of cool about them is that they have these replaceable caps. And what's neat about the way they work is they have a little tiny ridge here, so you can basically make a hole a little smaller than the ridge and drop this button down in there, and it's going to stay. It's not going to be able to fall out the other side. And so you can make things like thermostats and just anything where you need a button inside of an enclosure, with that kind of little feel. A lot of things you find on Thingiverse that you 3D print, they're going to have holes that are made for these style buttons. Sorry, I had a little recording problem, but these buttons are super handy for makers. I've got some in a breadboard here, and basically when the button is pushed, these two wires are connected, and so you get this nice little super easy, super to distinguish click. And again, they're really cheap. I didn't spend a lot of money on all these, but it's nice to have a set and a variety of them. And they may come in other colors, but these are the ones that came in my set. So we'll clear this stuff away. Again, being a child of the 80s, the idea of arcade buttons is just really awesome to me. I grew up with a lot of arcade stuff, and you can see I've got these in 1 player, 2 player, 3 player, 4 player, and plain white button and all that kind of stuff. These are generically known as HAP buttons, and they're the common button that you normally see on an arcade thing. And I will say there's HAP buttons, which this is an actual HAP brand button, and this is the switch that generally comes with a HAP button. But there's a difference. Like the newer ones, I don't know if you can see this on the video, but this is a really bold purple, and this is kind of washed out. You can kind of see the same thing with the yellow. The new Chinesium ones are, this is an orangey yellow, and this is more of a traditional, what you would consider yellow. If you get the opportunity to buy the Hap brand buttons, I would highly recommend it. In fact, to give you an idea of how strong these things are, I used to use them in the paintball field. So picture that you have something like a fake tank or something, and you want a group to be able to take over the tank. Well, you would have to shoot this button, or I guess you could run up to it and hit it, but you'd have to shoot this button to disable the tank. And so, the fact that all day long in the summer in Florida, these things could take non-stop kids shooting at them gives you an idea of just how strong they are. Now, I don't know that I would do the same thing with the imitation Hap button. And basically, there are two types of switches they come with. The better ones tend to be these white ones, and especially if you can get the older ones, they're rated for just millions of clicks, and so you might be able to hear the difference. Let me see. So this kind of has more of a chunk, 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 and this has more of a click, click, click. And this is your typical arcade thing. And in fact, this is enough that you can actually feel that in the button. Like, this is not easy to press, and it may wear in a little bit, but it's there's just a difference in these red ones that are coming with the buttons now. But the way they can be wired is this is a common terminal, and then you can wire them as normally closed by connecting the other side to this, or normally open when connecting to that. And the way these work is you basically, you take your button like this and you look for the side that needs to be clicked. Let me get the good one. I put the junky one in. So you look for the side that needs to be clicked and you put that down. And then there's two tabs in here, and there's a lower one and an upper one. So you put this thing in the lower one, and then you kind of rotate it forward and you can pull this out of the way. And then now all of a sudden, now you have the official arcade clicky sound. So again, they make these in a lot of different styles and colors. They make them in shorter ones and longer ones. And if you buy some of the really junky ones, they'll come with fine threads as opposed to the coarse threads. And just be a little careful with that, especially both with stripping them out and with using the wrong nut, because the nut looks almost identical, but if you're using the wrong one, it's not going to grip right. So we'll clear those out of the way, and I'm going to tell you about some of the cheaper ones that are on the market now. So for one thing, when you're buying these buttons, you have the opportunity to buy them in concave, which means it's dipping down in the top, or convex, which means it's domed at the top. The typical arcade button is concave. So if you're looking for that arcade feel, you want the concave one. Now, to show you the difference, this is close to a Hap button. They both have the concave feel, but this one has the microcontroller or the micro switch built in, and that seems like it would be an advantage, but it's really a disadvantage because this is a piece of junk. In fact, I have one here that I have no idea why, but all of a sudden, it got one little grit in it, and this thing will not press. It gets stuck in the down position. And the other thing is, you take this with the built-in micro switch, and it just sounds like plastic. That gives the proper 1980s ka-chunk. And so, again, if you're doing a cheap project, there's nothing wrong with buying these. In fact, they are available in more colors. You're gonna have a harder time finding something like this in pink. They make it, but it's just not as common. I'm not telling you not to buy them, but I'm telling you, don't expect this when you buy this. So there's one kind that I would say is even worse than the two of those, and it has the same built-in micro switch in it, except it's this one-piece shallow mount unit. And in fact, if you are gonna mount this, you really need to mount it. I don't know if you look at this thing here, but I mean, that's about 3 to 5 millimeters apart there, and you need to give it a little bit of play. And so basically, there's almost no lip on this thing. If you look at this, you've got a nice chunky lip there that I can overhang my fingernail on, and this you barely catch an edge. And basically, if you're going to use this, you need to have a pretty precise 30 millimeter Forstner bit or paddle bit or something like that, and you need to drill it in there, and it needs to be in something that's probably 1.5 or 2 millimeters thick. You might be able to get away with 3, because basically you're going to have to push this in, and these little sides are going to squeeze in, then they're going to try to come out and grab the bottom of it. The only other option is if you can happen to catch the lip and you want to put a crap ton of hot glue around here or something. But again, this is the oh, that's just horrible. That's like the absolute worst of the arcade buttons. And to be honest, I think you're better off spending your money on something else. So I kind of call these things game show buttons. I have them in different colors. In fact, if you look here, you know, there's a white one and red one and all that kind of stuff. But which I don't know if you can see that, my monitor went off so I can't actually see what you're seeing. But these are little light up buttons that basically use the same type of switches. In fact, I have a slightly smaller version of it here. They're great for start and stop buttons for games or for interactive things. And the way they work is they have this little, I think that's a 12 volt light, but that could be an LED. It's a long time since I've looked at one of these things. But basically what you do is you can put power to these two terminals here. They're pretty chunky, nice little terminals. And then that drops in here. And then basically you can take your same micro switch that you use on the arcade buttons and pivot that in like this. And so you get the normal arcade sound and all that kind of stuff in a light up bigger button. And the thing that makes these different is their surface mount. So if you look, I mean, you can just drill basically 1.125", no, not even 1.125", maybe a 1-inch hole or something like that, and drop this in. And there's a lot of room to give in here because you have this giant area on the edge of the button that will just basically sit on top of a surface. So these are kind of cool. They're pretty flexible. They're not as heavy duty as the other ones. I'm sure you've seen something like this. You've seen them probably in gas stations. You've seen them in CNC machines and laser cutters and things like that. And it's an emergency stop button. And the way it works is you picture it being on the wall or on your CNC controller and you slap it. And when you do, it sends a signal or breaks the signal or whatever. And then this stays in the off position until you come here and manually turn this to pop it back out. So again, like I can't keep pushing it, like it's locked in the off position. Now this one, and I have another one that doesn't have this kind of ring on it. I mean, they look cheap. They just looks like they did the absolute bare minimum to build this. So I mean, again, I certainly wouldn't be protecting gas pumps with it. I don't even know that I would use it in some place that's life or death, but chances are if you bought a CNC machine from China or something, it's got this switch on it, and they're available and they are cool. What I think it is, it's a really good prop. It's a really good, you know, thing for a game or something like that. You get something that looks like it's the quality of something at the gas station at AliExpress prices, and so that's kind of cool. Two more here. These are really kind of heavy duty. I don't know if you can see this, but the outside of this button doesn't move, but the inside does. And there's actually some action going on right in here where you can see the actual terminals connecting and stuff like that. And these are, I have these in a couple different colors, but they light up and they're very cool. They're very heavy duty, very solid push buttons, and something that would give you a real good industrial look if you're building something that's supposed to look like a spaceship or a factory or something like that. Like these buttons are pretty legit, and they're not really that expensive. Last but not least, I found this at a yard sale. I've passed up on them a bunch of times, but this is a foot pedal for something, I guess technically a foot switch for something like a Casio keyboard or something. And it's not a variable resistance, it's just on and off, but or I guess actuated, not actuated. And so something like this, you could get it for $6-7 off Amazon. I paid less than $1 at a yard sale for it. But you know, picture yourself, you're building a spot welder, you're building some kind of thing, like you want to have an emergency alarm where if somebody ticks you off in your office, you can trigger this with your foot or whatever. Kind of a cool thing, and yeah, just good to know it's there. So anyway, that is my button collection, and I will see you next Monday.